So I guess I got my big break talking about boobs, and now I'm realizing that they are two peaks that are difficult to top in terms of sensationalism. I mean, what could I talk about? How about American gun culture? Okay, perhaps not the right time. Mary Jane in Spider-Man 2? I'm not gonna play that game anyways. Ooh, okay, let's talk about Taiwan. Alright, I need to outline some very important guidelines, and I take them very seriously when discussing something like this. I'm going to first tell you what this video will not be. This is not about communism, and it is not about independence or who is in the right. My use of the name Taiwan is not an indication of my political standing, it's merely the most common name used among my audience for the purpose of communication. This story is a story about people and the tragedy that claimed uncountable lives, a broken people, and the repercussions of events in history. This is going to be a heavy topic, so this is your warning. If you are sensitive about atrocities in history, then it is best that you turn back now. I also want to preface this by saying that I am not a native Chinese speaker, so I'm going to butcher these names. I apologize in advance. I'm doing my best. Now, I know what you're thinking. Liv, what has this got to do with video games? Just let me cook, it will all become clear in time, but first, we need to look back to the past. Now, if you were to look at a Taiwanese passport today, you might notice that on the front of the passport and under the nationality, you will see the Republic of China. Now, to begin with, Taiwan does have indigenous people. Roughly 2.5% of the population consists of these people. Taiwan was colonized by the Portuguese and the Spanish and later fell under Chinese rule from 1662 to 1895, where the Japanese took over until Japan's eventual surrender at the end of World War II in 1945. Now, what is important to note is that most of Taiwan's population are descendants of Han lineage, namely the Hoklo from Fujian, which makes up approximately 70% of the current population, and the Hakka originating from Guangdong, which makes up approximately 15% of the current population. This will become important later. What is important to note is that Chinese don't speak Mandarin by default. To this day, every city or village has a unique dialect, to the point where someone from Hubei speaking their dialect cannot be understood by someone from Chaoshan, and vice versa. Now, my wife is Chinese, and she has graciously reached out to her friends to demonstrate. And for this, we will use the sentence, "Today is a really good day to go to the market and buy apples."
潮州话、
今日可食下课菜市店冇蘋果。
海南话、
人暖嘅公啱好西是兩杯蘋果。
蘇州話、
現在你們說這些錢了冇蘋果。
客家話。
今日好適合去市場買蘋果。
So listening to them side by side and with the foreknowledge of knowing what the sentence is, you may be able to pick out some of the similarities, but I assure you, all of this goes away when you're talking to someone in person. So in 1945, Taiwan was returned to the Kuomintang, or the Chinese nationalists, with the support and economic aid of the United States. It's important to note that World War II was merely a break in an already existing civil war between the nationalists and the communists in China, with the war promptly resuming when the Japanese surrender was imminent. This is the point where things start to go from bad to worse for the people of Taiwan, but it is only the beginning. I need to stop here for a moment to talk about countries in general. I've personally been a citizen of two different countries. As such, I don't feel a strong sense of nationalism or patriotism to any particular country. Don't get me wrong, I will perform my civil duties and contribute to society, but the thing I noticed is that every country indoctrinates its people and attempts to censor what their citizens consume in the way of information. Some are more heavy-handed than others, some will use state law, others will use incentives and mix and match as it suits. But if you think that you live in a country that doesn't participate in trying to control the narrative, then you are truly naive. Every country, every place, and every point of leadership that has ever existed buries its skeletons. So for many people, 1945 is the end. Democracy won with the United States blessings, and Taiwan had some minor upsets, but it wasn't a big deal really, right? I mean, only communists do bad things, right? This is the lie. Everyone does bad things. Now, Taiwan looked to the Kuomintang as liberators after 50 years under Japanese rule, but the Kuomintang were tired, unorganized, and a corrupt rabble. It didn't take long for their jubilation to turn to dismay as the Kuomintang turned their eyes from liberating Taiwan to bolstering the war efforts on the mainland. Mainland Chinese were given preferential treatment, higher salaries, and better positions than the local non-Mandarin speakers. Locals were conscripted to fight the communists, resources were siphoned to the mainland, and the prices of basic necessities like rice went up. To say that there was strain on the Taiwanese people would be an understatement. The resentment that the Taiwanese felt toward mainland Chinese would finally boil over into violence on February 27, 1947. Bear with me here because some of the details are different depending on where you read them, but I did my best to place the events as accurately as possible. A Taiwanese widow was confronted by State Monopoly Bureau agents for the suspected selling of cigarettes. One of the agents struck the widow and bystanders started to gather in outrage at what they saw. One of the officers fired into the crowd. Newspapers were then ordered not to report the incident in hopes of diminishing the fallout. The next day, the man that was shot died. 228. February 28, 1947 would come to be taught in Taiwanese schools as the February 28th incident. To the people that lived through it, it was the February 28th massacre. February 28th, the protesters marched on the State Monopoly Bureau as a call to justice for the man that died. When the crowd swarmed the unprepared Governor General's office, his guards fired on the protesters, killing at least 3 people. On March 4th, local Taiwanese forced their way into a local radio station and broadcast the incident, calling for revolt. As a result, Taiwanese demanded that strangers either speak Japanese, Hokkien, or Hakka dialects. As mentioned earlier, there was almost no chance that a Mandarin-speaking Chinese would be able to respond appropriately. If they did not respond correctly, they were beaten and some were killed. Over 1,000 mainland Chinese were killed in this period, some of them completely unaware of the situation. A few days later, the Taiwanese formed local resolution committees and demanded 32 reforms. Unfortunately, it would seem that the local Taiwanese were not familiar with Jiang Jieshi's methods of dealing with dissension. April 12, 1927, Jiang Jieshi's forces purged Shanghai of all Communist Party members, supporters, and protesters, firing into a crowd of unarmed protesters consisting of mostly students and industrial workers, killing 100. In Shanghai alone, 4,000 people were executed, killed, or vanished. Bear in mind that 6 days prior, the Kuomintang had congratulated and thanked the communists for taking control of Shanghai for the nationalist government. The Shanghai massacre would later be called the White Terror. Jiang Jieshi, the most prominent leader within the Kuomintang, was infamously known for stating that he would rather mistakenly kill 1,000 innocent people than allow one communist to escape. Now, whether or not Jiang Jieshi had a role in what would come next is unclear. It's clear that the governor of Taiwan, Chen Yi, stalled the resolution committees to buy time. Jiang Jieshi claimed that he never received a request for military aid, but independent investigation concluded that military aid was requested. What is certain is that whether it was Jiang Jieshi or Chen Yi, what came next was right out of the White Terror playbook. Military forces arrived March 8th, firing before they had even made the shore. The violence was swift. In urban areas, soldiers shot at anyone they saw. Most of the violence was completely indiscriminate, but some of it was systematic, as Governor Chen Yi identified as many local Taiwanese leaders as he could. What's clear here is that this was a tragic and meaningless loss of life. What makes it worse is that we don't even have clear records of the tragedy. Conservative government estimates were between 3,000 and 4,000 people killed on the island in putting down the alleged communist rebellion. It is now more commonly accepted that the figure for lives lost was between 18,000 and 28,000 people during this period. The report immediately after the incident to Jiang Jieshi stated that the Taiwanese had been weakened by the evil teachings of the Japanese colonizers and they fell under the influence of communist propaganda. By the end of March, Chen Yi was relieved of his duties for his brutality and later executed by Jiang Jieshi for attempting to defect to the communists later in his life. Sadly, things are about to get even worse for the Taiwanese people. Jiang Jieshi always had ambitions of unifying China and Taiwan, and part of this overarching goal was to supplant all of the local rule with mainland rule and abolish local languages. In 1949, Jiang Jieshi would be forced to retreat from mainland China after losing several key engagements with the communists. This would be when Jiang Jieshi would consolidate Taiwan under Kuomintang rule and leave a legacy of tyranny that would last from 1949 to 1987. Taiwan's White Terror was a state of martial law where opposing the Kuomintang had severe consequences. There was a minimum jail sentence of 7 years for acting against the government, and accused conspirators could serve anywhere between 5 months to 5 years. Being a leader in opposition could earn you a trip to Green Island for life, where you would be subjected to psychological therapy, re-education, and coerced confessions for your crimes. Sedition or potential participation in a revolt was punishable by death. Collective punishment meant that if you had a link to anyone charged, you could also be charged. Citizens were charged with the responsibility of reporting any offense to the Kuomintang, whether it be a friend, a colleague, your spouse, or your local store owner. Taiwan's secret police sought to enforce these laws, and in doing so created a culture of excommunication and distrust in the home. Anyone that didn't fall in line or say the right words was a potential and real threat to your own well-being. The Kuomintang didn't only oppress through law, but sought to indoctrinate its citizens through media and through its own education system. One of the core tenets of the Kuomintang taught to children was that Taiwan was part of China and that the Kuomintang would one day restore themselves as the rightful government of China. The teachers were all mainlanders and the locals were only allowed to serve as assistants. Part of the daily routine was to teach the children military songs with lyrics like "Fight our way back to the mainland." Textbooks taught Chinese culture and effectively erased any of the local identity of the Taiwanese people. Students and staff caught speaking Taiwanese dialects were either fined or forced to wear signs for classmates to ridicule them. It's very clear looking back that the goal was to erase any notion of local Taiwanese identity and raise soldiers to take back the mainland. So this is where we pause on our history lesson, and we're going to change gears a bit and talk about a small Taiwanese game studio called Red Candle Games. Red Candle Games currently has 2 games under its belt made in the Unity engine. Every time I hear Unity engine, I cringe a little. Now, what makes this worse for me personally is anytime a game's selling point is its art style, I double cringe because my knee-jerk reaction is, oh, it's going to be one of these abstract games where there's a flying fish in the air, and if you criticize it, then you were simply not smart enough to get the nuance. Like, bro, I get the nuance, it's just that the nuance was not worth wading through hours of tedium. Anyways, now that you know my bias against high art pie-in-the-sky games in general, I'm here to say I was wrong about this one. Red Candle's first game is a side-scroller indie horror game named Detention. The game centers mostly around a schoolgirl named Fang Ruxin, who was growing up in the 1960s in Taiwan. Now, the message at the start of the game tells you that all the story events are fictional, and they are, but the represented physical scenarios that take place in the game are not fictional to Taiwanese that grew up within the White Terror. In fact, I wrote the history of the White Terror segment in the script before I played Detention, and what was shocking to me was how many events in the game line up from the history you've just heard. In case this was all not obvious enough, the school warden is literally named Instructor Bai being Mandarin for white. I don't want to talk about the game too much, and this isn't a review. I hope that after learning what I learned, that you will be able to go and play the game for yourself. I think what Red Candle Games did in such a tactful way is they created a game about politics. It's a critique of the politics and an unmasking of what was classified and downplayed by the Taiwanese government for many years, but more importantly, they demonstrate the effects in such a personal and relatable way. Detention puts the effects of the politics at play in the 1960s on the day-to-day person, and you engage and watch it unfold before you. Knowing what I know now, I could not put this game down. It's truly one of those moments where you might know something on an intellectual level, but Detention lets you feel it, and because it's so accurate in its depiction, in spite of the artistic expression, I feel like it would be difficult not to be moved to compassion, knowing that someone out there lived this nightmare. On a personal level, I know that the art style mimics film from the time period with Taiwan's aesthetics, but it creeped me out to no end that it reminds me of the fever dreams I had when I was sick as a kid, devoid of color and repetitive cycles that distort and trap you. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. I just kind of wonder if one of the devs experienced something like this. Now, moving into the early 90s and onwards into the 2000s, Taiwan has gone through great strides to unearth and recognize the events of the White Terror, and though you can't really give back the lives that were stolen or lost, it is a commendable effort to undo some of what has been done. There are now memorials and museums that cover the atrocities, and local dialects and cultures that were once on the verge of extinction are now upheld and celebrated. So while the history and the facts surrounding the White Terror are a bitter pill and a difficult reality to come to terms with, facing it and learning from it has led to greater prosperity within Taiwan. Unfortunately, this is not where the story ends. Red Candle Games has a second title that covers the time period of the early to mid 80s toward the end of the White Terror, and this game is called Devotion. You see, we have to think about what happens to any structure once its foundations collapse. Taiwan during the White Terror was an environment that heavily rewarded compliance. On the flip side, non-compliance was not only a severe personal punishment, but a curse on your entire family and loved ones. Pair this with teachings of Buddhism, karma, and reincarnation, and the effect is amplified. Even though they aren't directly related, it is not hard to see how an authoritarian government can hijack the belief in a synergistic manner that takes the seat of God. So the Taiwanese government removes the mask of God and says the people can do what they want. Now, this is fantastic. I mean, this is what the people of Taiwan wanted all along, right? To be treated as equals and to be able to live their life and practice their customs without scrutiny. And while this was a time of liberation, it wasn't liberation for everyone. For many people, their sense of nationalism trumped things like family, and their whole morality was dissipating with no direction. So then we have a percentage of people that are directionless, they have lost their moral compass, and the reward/punishment structures that were the guiding rails are now gone. In a sense, this percentage of the population were searching for a new master. They didn't know how to be free. This created a power vacuum, but not in the way that you would normally expect, with all the upheaval, laws, and attitudes of the people heavily favoring self and corporate expression, so long as it didn't involve Taiwan's classified history. So we have a confused flock in search of guidance. The gate to the paddock is open, so to speak, and as one can imagine, wolves in sheep clothing were quick to prey on the opportunity presented by the chaos. As such, to this day, Taiwan is a melting pot of cults and religions that seem to mostly just get along. This is partially because most Eastern-based religions and cults are based on the concept of reaping rewards within one's lifetime. It's not to say that they are benign, but it is to say that the likelihood of them turning to physical violence or mass suicide is much lower than in Western cults and religions. One could say they are more practical. For a case study, we're going to have a look at the Buddhist cult of Rulaizong, founded by Liu Jinlong, an ex-stuntman famously known for being able to sit on a bed of nails. Now, Rulaizong is not the exact cult or misleading force that I am referring to at the end of the White Terror. It's too recent, but I'd posit that it's more an extrapolation of the effect. So let's visit the claims of Liu Jinlong. Liu Jinlong claims to be Buddha and has changed his name multiple times, the current one being a literal translation of the wonderful Zen. Liu Jinlong is believed to be able to cure people's bad karma. If you do not follow Liu Jinlong's teachings, you can only be reincarnated at the same level you are now or at a lower status. You cannot become a believer of Rulaizong without introduction by a current believer. Rulaizong does not allow critically ill patients or children to be believers. Now, for the services of maybe having your karma fixed, not coming back as a cockroach, and being part of the Purple Shirt Club, what will it cost? Well, the admission fee is 300 Taiwan dollars, or you get a discount to 200 Taiwan dollars if you're a student. You then have an extra fee of 2,000 Taiwan dollars charged monthly, which is optional, but I feel like it's optional in the same way tipping parking guards in South Africa is optional. I mean, do you really want to take the gamble of finding out what your lack of devotion earns you? Some people have claimed that there have been additional fees per event on top of all of this, since Rulaizong has clubs in universities, but it is broadly denied by the clubs accused. Now, is Rulaizong a sham? Well, I don't know. I've never been there. I just read about it online. Perhaps I am missing the enlightenment required to believe. The point I'm making here is that it's a fact that Liu Jinlong is making bank from the pockets of 90,000 or so Taiwanese people, and he's not the only one. Now, what does this mean anyways? I mean, after all, I am white man makes video essay guy. According to the internet, I cannot talk about other sexes or races, and if I dare open my mouth about men, it better be about how they need to pay for their sins, right? Well, I'm not the one saying it. Red Candle Games, comprised of Taiwanese people, are saying it in Devotion. Devotion follows the story of the Du family, this time a first-person 3D horror game made in Unity. You play the role of Du Fengyu, who is married to Gong Lifang, and they have a daughter named Mei Xin. Again, I don't want to spoil the game too much, but this game is just so much more than your run-of-the-mill horror walking sim puzzle adventure. Unfortunately, Devotion is marred in controversy, and it's hardly for exciting reasons. The game was review bombed on Steam after Chinese players found a couple of derogatory jabs toward mainland Chinese people. Now, I say that it was in poor taste, not because of the Winnie the Pooh meme, but because it directly alienates the largest population of people that are trying to learn about your culture, where they have the best chance of getting where you are coming from, or perhaps even giving them a new perspective that they never had before. It's just shooting yourself in the foot, you know? Anyways, they replaced Winnie the Pooh and other derogatory stuff and apologized, claiming that it was a placeholder, which is elaborate. But moving on. Devotion was taken down from Steam and all other outlets with the statement that the devs would only consider putting the game out if people really wanted it again. As a pivot, Red Candle Games also opened their own store on their website, which is where I bought the games, and the link will be in the description. Also, just a side note, but the music in both Detention and Devotion are amazing, and I'm thinking of going back to purchase them. They did a stellar job of really reaching inside of you on a fundamental level that broke language barriers. I'm going to spoil Devotion here, so please, by all means, stop here and play the game for yourself. So, like Detention, Devotion has a lot of symbolism that doesn't really make sense without the historical context. And the story doesn't play out in a linear fashion, rather you go back and forth between different years, but the gist is that Du Fengyu is a screenplay writer. Gong Lifang was a famous actress who abandoned her career to start a family with you, and your daughter is something of a child prodigy that inherited her mother's ability to sing, and she wants to be a superstar one day. Unfortunately, Du Fengyu starts to lose touch as a writer, and his scripts are being rejected. The money is starting to dwindle, and Mei Xin has an episode at school where she can't breathe and is sent to hospital. The doctors prescribe medication, but nothing helps. In fact, they believe it is all in Mei Xin's head. I still remember this one crucial scene where Mei Xin is sick of taking the pills, so she throws them into the fish tank and the fish dies. On the pill are several inscriptions, 7146 and CCP being the most prominent ones. CCP is obviously the Chinese Communist Party, but 7146 is a bit harder to grasp. Remembering that non-American countries read dates as day, month, and then year, 7146 ends up being 7th of January 1946. This was the day that the Kuomintang officialized Taipei County. My speculation is that it is seen as the day where the Kuomintang really took root in Taiwan and marks the beginning of what would eventually lead to the White Terror. The overarching theme here was that political ideals could not fix Mei Xin. They were poison handed down from points of authority. Du Fengyu refuses to see his daughter as defective or to accept her suffering, so he seeks to find another way, and he turns to a mystic that practices a sect of Buddhism based on a Fujian myth. The mystic seemingly heals Mei Xin for a price. Du Fengyu becomes an avid devotee and starts throwing their savings at the mystic, much to the dismay of Gong Lifang. Gong Lifang desperately wants wants the marriage to work, but she cannot get through to Du Fengyu, who blames his wife's karma for Mei Xin's condition. Eventually, she abandons the family with the intent of earning enough money to take Mei Xin with her. Mei Xin loves her dad, and even Mei Xin comes to the realization that her symptoms are manageable, but Du Fengyu's religious devotion blinds him to the obvious answer, often ignoring his daughter's plea in pursuit of restoring her to the superstar status that he imagines is her destiny. Now, I can't even finish writing this, it's too heartbreaking. If you want to know how it ends, play the game, you won't regret it. Well, you might regret it, but you'll feel better for it. If you can't do scary games, maybe find someone that's streaming it. So yeah, Taiwan has a rich history. Some of it's not so nice, and some of it is truly wonderful. And I think that some things can't be sweet without the bitterness that precedes it. I mean, on a very low level, how many musicians do you listen to and their first album is their best album? Because it's the thing of beauty that is born out of a real struggle or sadness, and then once everyone connects with those songs and they become affluent and famous, they seemingly lose the spark and are unable to connect. It's the bitterness of what came first that makes the sweet a genuine and heartfelt thing. I'll be the first to admit that while I have gone through my own personal struggles, they pale in comparison to what I believe many Taiwanese people endured. That's not to invalidate my own struggle, but it's good to acknowledge what it might have been like for other people in the world, the very same world that we all share. I think it's important to remember the people that lost everything in the process of Taiwan's struggle. They were fighting a war, but there are no medals on their chests. They were erased from memory, and the mention of their mere existence was cursed, while we, as a global community, played along like nothing was happening. We didn't care how many people died as long as the killer holding the knife wasn't red. Now, don't get it twisted, I'm not saying this in support of communism. That's a whole other kettle of fish with its own problems and atrocities, and I know that some idiot in the comments is going to try to create a tally as if it's some kind of score, and my question is this: what's wrong with you? This isn't about which ideal is the winner. It is about the disgusting lengths that we as humans will go to under the claim that the end justifies the means. It's the tragedy of ideals made to serve us becoming our gods, and our gods demand blood.